Welcome back to On the Record. I'm Deborah Morgan. We're talking about faith and trust in journalism and the role it plays in our democracy. For anyone with an extended interest in this topic, I encourage you to check out an August 2020 study from the Gallup and Knight Foundation we were just talking about. It measured 20,000 Americans' attitudes toward the media. One of their metrics, Americans' perceptions of political bias in the news by political parties. So take a look at this graphic. 46% of Americans overall believe there is a great deal of bias in news coverage. By party, that number is lower among Democrats at 27%, nearly half with independents, and 2/3 of Republicans at 68%. In an effort to better understand this greater distrust among Republicans, we invited two panelists you've seen over the years on WRAL, former Governor Pat McCrory and conservative campaign strategist Steven Xavier. Governor, let me start with you. You have a unique perspective since you've been in public office for so many years and you now have a daily radio talk show in Charlotte. As we look at the results of this study, can you tell us why Republicans are more likely to distrust the media?
Well, let me first say, now that I've been in the media on a radio talk show, and also I do Meet the Press about every 2 months for the last 2 or 3 years, I've realized there is a similarity between politicians and the media. First, they both have thin skin. They're both rather narcissistic. And third, they're both in a business of speaking to their base. Because they have to respond to what the base says, because that's how the revenue is derived. So the first thing you have to understand when you're in media, it is a business and they have to pay their bills. And that may also show the bias and the narrative of the stories that are presented to the public in whatever location the majority might be in the area. So yes, I do believe as a Republican, the majority of media tends to be more liberal biased, but also the media is very segregated in their own silos now, especially on cable TV, where the liberals are listening to liberals, the conservatives are listening to conservatives, and no one's hearing both sides, which I think is very dangerous to our democracy regarding the segregation of media and the audience it reaches out and the narrative set in that media to the audience that they know they don't want to lose in order to make profit.
Steven, we heard you earlier talking about your distrust of the media. Is this new for you, or have you felt this way for some time?
For some time, and I think Susan raised a couple of great points, and I'll just really just capture one here about blurring the lines, and also the governor's similar point. I think the issue, Deborah, is that people are taking the talking heads and the pundits often very literally, as though they are experts in journalists, and many times they're not. Although Don Lemon, and Sean Hannity may look like they're news people, they're not. They're really pundits. And each has their own extreme bias. And quite frankly, I try to land in the middle and listen and be more objective. But to the points that Susan and the governor both made, I think one of the issues, going back to the governor's comment about why so many Republicans feel there's such bias in the media, is because you have Fox News and everybody else. And I think that it's so overwhelming, liberal versus conservative, that people on the right side, if you will, do feel that way. There's so few outlets. And only recently, OANN and Newsmax are up and running. But frankly, they're just coming out of that high school theatrical kind of a look and not as professional as a Fox News. So it's got a ways to go before that overwhelming feeling is overcome by Republicans, or conservatives, I should say, that listen to the news.
Governor, you were in office during a very divisive time when HB 2 brought LGBTQ rights to the forefront. How do you think the media treated you then?
Very poorly. First of all, most of the media never read the bill. It was only a 5-page bill, and I could tell by the interviews that no one even understood the bill and knew that half the bill had to do with minimum wage and small and city ability to make laws outside of the state. And that's really what the bill was about. But they focused on the sexual orientation aspect of it, which brings more viewers. And that was very discouraging to me. And plus, I spent maybe 0.2% of my time on that during my 4 years as governor, as opposed to the more complex issue of doing our budget. How do you deal with the healthcare overruns? How do you deal with some of the environmental issues? How do you deal with transportation issues? The media was not interested in those issues at the local, state, or national level. They were They were interested in the issues that brought more clicks and more viewers. And that was very discouraging because 99.9% of my time was not spent on the issues that the media covered. I spent a lot of study time on very complex issues that mayors and governors and the executive branches have to deal with. And frankly, the media is not interested because it's boring. And that's a real problem with the media right now. But that's the business side of the media. They want clicks now.
Well, I want to bring Dean Susan King back into the conversation now. You are the head of a very respected journalism school. People respect UNC across the country. How do you teach students so they can be trusted journalists? Is it hard to put their bias aside?
I'm going to say, particularly because of what they see, yes, I think it is. But I'm going to put it a little different way. I definitely think some evening shows are playing to the base, as you say. Sean Hannity, Don Lemon, they have a base. But I don't think RAL is playing to the base. I think RAL is playing to its community. And I think really great journalism organizations are usually thinking, who is our audience and how do we respond to them and how can we serve them? And we are trying to develop journalists who are going to really serve their community. I do think this young generation is also much more aware of their identity, and there's so much they grow up with Facebook, and they've got stuff hanging out there from the time they're 14, right? And Instagram, et cetera. We are trying to teach them that if you are going to be a reporter and you don't erase a woman. I was the first woman in every newsroom I was in. I wasn't going to be the woman reporter, but I was bringing my perspective, and I'd see news stories that the guys didn't see. I believed that I would find women I could interview, but I still was there to tell you what I learned, not what I thought you ought to know. If I was an opinion person, I'd probably be making more money like Sean Hannity, but that wasn't my job. And so we're trying to develop to make sure they understand the difference between fact and opinion, and they understand the role, but not to erase whether they're Black or Hispanic or gay, LGBTQ or a woman, but to understand when their role is that they put on that jacket, that white coat of objectivity to tell the public what they need to know about what the arguments are, not what to think.
I'll tell you one additional thing about that, however, the protesters, and I'm so glad that there's follow-up on who the heck these protesters are in D.C. and who they are and where they come from. That's good. But every day when I was governor, there were 5 or 6 protesters, and they'd come right at the time of the 6 o'clock news, and the minute the cameras left, they left. But they got this TV time, and no one ever knew who was coordinating those protesters. And that's part of the news story that's being left out at the local and state level is who are the protesters, who's paying for them, their transportation, the coordination, the signs. And because there's usually a political agenda behind every protesting group, both liberal and conservative. And the politicians know who they are, and I think the media does too, but the media needs to convey that more to the audience when they cover either local, state, or federal protests. And I'm finally glad to see some protesters called out in America regarding who are these people that do make pretty radical comments or destroy property.
Well, I will say, as Dean King said, I'm this week marking 28 years here at WRAL, and I got into this because I want to serve the community. I want to answer those questions. I want to ask those deep, probing questions to get to the heart of the issue. So I hope we can very quickly as we can go through you all. I would like to, as we wrap up, ask a question of all of you. What can the media do to earn back trust? Governor, you first.
I think the first thing that they need to do is give a broad perspective of complex issues and not make it black and white issues, because most complex issues have 5 or 6 sides to them, not just 2 sides to them.
Stephen?
And they need to focus on more long-term issues than short-term 24-hour news cycle issues.
Stephen, what do you think?
I would hinge on a point that Susan raised. I think I have a 16-year-old and a 20-year-old. I think their generation and the 2 before them, it's become they have insatiable appetites and appetites that need satisfaction right now. And I think that's translating into a lot of the young journalists that we see out there, the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings. They're not taking the time to dig in and delve into the story objectively and find the facts and report just the facts. Like they said back in the day, just the facts, ma'am.
Dean King, what can the media do to earn back trust?
I think every day they go out and try to tell the truth as they're able to find it, and they bring people together. We have a moment in this country we're divided. I hope we're not headed for a civil war. It's been a pretty tough week, let's face it. And I think that if you can bring the different points of view, the different players together, and try not to have people shouting at each other, but to really, as journalists in television, radio, and newspapers, bring different points of view so we can understand it better, I think hopefully we'll win back that trust. But it's a day-by-day process.
I hope you are right, and I agree. Thank you to all of you for your time and insight into this very important discussion.